sex into the second picture. Are we ready? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a financial journalist or a financial industry speaker. I was merely a foreign correspondent in Southeast Asia who took on boiler room fraudsters and probably took them on and didn't win. I was a sort of journalistic Don Quixote, tilting at windmills, and I probably caused them a lot of damage. But eventually I had to make a tactical retreat and get out of the country. Today, boiler rooms have starburst all over Southeast Asia, from Thailand to Cambodia to Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and in towns you'll never heard of. In Thailand, they've become part of the establishment. They bought up massive amounts of, they're buying into hotels. They've got control over the core of Thailand's sex industry, including this. This is Nana Plaza, right in the center of Bangkok, a massive sex tourism complex, probably the biggest now in Thailand. They boast it's the biggest in the world, I see on the picture there. And they're targeting, obviously, people in the English-speaking world and also most of Europe as well. In early 2015, I decided to pack my bags and leave. I may sound like a bit of a wuss, I've had threats before, but these guys were absolutely quite crazy. I mean, they were playing at gangsters, and it was a bit like as if somebody had thrown an Uzi into the playpen. So with 3 kids, I had prepared, so I walked my kids across. That's them. I walked my kids across the Cambodian border. As long as they had their, little iPad, they were quite happy with that. It was a bit of an adventure for them. And the Cambodian Interpol cleared me through to Vietnam, because obviously we'd done a bypass of immigration for reasons I'll explain later. But I mean, it's no big deal crossing borders. I've crossed borders many times in going into Cambodia, from when the Khmer Rouge was still operating. And of course, this one here, going into rebel-held territory in Burma. That was with the Kachin, but I've also been in to see the Shan, heroin warlord Kun Sa, and so on. So my departure made the media in a few papers, The Guardian, Sydney Morning Herald, Bangkok Post, complaining about foreign criminals in Thailand. Who'd have thunk it? Thailand, many of you, I presume, will have been there. It's a lovely country, warm people, paradise beaches. Perhaps some of the beaches not as good as they used to due to mass tourism. But there is another side of Thailand, of course, and that is a darker side. Just like the prisons have whitewashed walls and manicured gardens on the outside, Thailand does have another side. For instance, the police and army tend to run most of the rackets. And if they're not running the rackets, whoever is running those rackets will be paying the police or the army. Boiler room guys moving to Asia found out very quickly they could buy off the local police. Not only that, they also found out they could get rid of their enemies quite quickly by paying $1,500 to waste a rival. Murders of them, there would be murders. None of them were seriously investigated. I mean, these guys, obviously, like the film Wolf of Wall Street, consumed copious amounts of drugs. That was all brought in for them. nobody was ever touched. I mean, you read in the papers, of course, people can get sentenced to death or 50 years for drugs in Southeast Asia. It's true. I've had to interview some people who've been hanged. But it doesn't generally happen to rich people. More recently, it looks like they're starting doing the murders themselves. They're not even hiring gunmen. This guy, Tony Kenway, was murdered in Pattaya last year. That's the eastern resort known for its sexy nightlife. So it was all over in a few seconds, as you'll see from this video. Oh. That's Tony Kenway coming up now, going towards the red car. And you'll see a guy coming up behind him with a bag. Right, in those 2 seconds, he got 4 shots off. And he's running away now and getting on his motorcycle. So, these are the guys that were accused of the killing. Abel Bonita, a South African, and Miles Turner, a British guy from Oxford. They know it was them because when they hired the motorbike, they left their passports as security. I mean, can you believe that? So these guys are playing at gangsters. The man that is allegedly the boss who paid them to do it is Toby Nellums. He was arrested I think a month or so ago in Spain. But nothing's going to happen to the murderers. They got on the motorbikes and then got a bus and went across to Cambodia. And the Thai authorities haven't even issued any extradition warrants for them, proceedings. And for the Thais, Israeli, well, it's foreigners killing foreigners. Same with fraud cases, it's foreigners defrauding foreigners. They don't really care. Anyway, my involvement in boiler rooms goes back to 2001, when a couple of guys came to me in Bangkok. They were from Bolton in Lancashire, and they'd gone to an interview in the Piccadilly Hotel in Manchester. And within a couple of weeks, they were in a boiler room in Bangkok, locked up during the day, and forced to sell shares in New York Harbor Petroleum or something like that. They knew it was duff. They got that very quickly. The room manager was saying, pardon my English, get them to the fucking bank, continuously to all the callers. And the prize for the salesman of the week was a night with 2 prostitutes and a magnum of champagne. So I decided to follow these guys. Oh, sorry. I'll just mention this. I forgot entirely about this. This is Tony Kenway, the guy that was murdered in Pattaya. He had this picture on his Facebook. That's him at an audience with the King of Thailand. Actually, the king was Crown Prince then, but he's since been crowned king. And that message is to tell anybody, I'm untouchable. I mean, clearly he wasn't, but it opens up a whole new chapter in the development of boiler rooms. Right. So I decided to follow these guys, and they where the guys from Bolton had been working as they left work. And, they seemed normal enough type of people. And they worked for, the company they worked for was Foreign Currency International. That's more of them coming down the street. Then I was approached by their head of security, a Thai guy called Jalit Sanitjon, who strode up to me and told me, well, we know who you are. He told me my name and he told me the address in which I'd registered my car. Living in Thailand, being a journalist in Thailand, I'd obviously registered the car in a false address. But he could have easily got my address from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or something like that. And he said, if you deal with us, you're dealing with the military, you're dealing with the army, and you're dealing with the royal family. And I wrote the story anyway, and nothing happened, but at least two of those things were, as it turned out, to be correct. Right. This is the raid on Brinton boiler room in 2001, July. It was in July. I'd been called up with this by a diplomat at the Australian embassy who told me that Australians had been defrauded out of 200 million Aussie dollars. They were concerned, and then they let me know about this raid, so I watched as this raid went down. And I was a bit surprised, how many young people could be persuaded to fly all the way to Bangkok purely for the purposes of going into fraud. Back in the UK, I'm not so surprised now, though. Women as well. It's not just men going for the sex trade. And that was John Keeley, the boss. That cartoon or caricature was found in the offices. Obviously, throwing the money around there. Right, and some people were so keen to get out of Thailand, that they, as you can see from this report, I think it's by the Telegraph, they handed over $100,000 to officials at immigration as they were leaving. And I made a note of one guy there called John Hayward, who was an English guy I was come across quite a lot. So that's right, I was working with the Times at the time, so I wrote a fairly big piece for them on boiler rooms in Southeast Asia. And I sat back and watched what was happening to the Brinton case. And in the Brinton case, all the loaders were merely, or these guys using the phones, they were just merely deported and given a small fine for working without a permit. And then a few months later, although the bosses had been charged, all charges of fraud were also dismissed. And you can see here, obviously the victims of the boiler room frauds were in Australia were apoplectic. And they begged ASIC, the Australian Securities Investment Commission, not to let the Hong Kong banks unfreeze the cash. The Hong Kong banks were the Standard Bank mainly, and the Hong Kong Bank itself in Hong Kong. So Peter Cowell, just reminds me here, he said there was no evidence of any investors being able to identify key figures in the Brinton Group. I mean, they'd already pleaded guilty to charges under the SEC in Thailand, and they'd been fined, $15,000, equivalent of about $15,000. So there was no doubt they had identified themselves. But Peter Kell didn't see the irony in trumpeting ASIC's one achievement, and that was the arrest and conviction of Paul Richard Bell. Paul Richard Bell must have been singing Waltzing Matilda as he left Australia, because he got a suspended sentence and a fine, I think 12,000 Aussie dollars, which of course the victims of his scams would be paying for. Back in Thailand, I caught him joining the patio branch of Optimus International, along with some real scoundrels. can't see it, but it's Drew Noyes, who was done for extortion, Brian Wright, who was wanted in Rhode Island in the States for offences against children, 2 other boiler room scammers. Anyway, he went on then to rejoin his friends in Bangkok, known as the Big Bangkok Five. That's that Paul Hayward. That's the John Hayward that was on the plane. His real name is Paul John Hayward. He's British. The rest, Mark Hutchison, Glenn Bullard, and Dan Prather, all American. With the collapse of the Brinton prosecution, boiler rooms, when they skyrocketed. They're forming all over the place now in Asia. Some of these guys did boiler rooms together. They had their own rooms, and they shared the scams. They passed them around. They had a few glitches. This is one Paul Hayward set up in Cambodia. They were raided before they'd even bought their desks. The snoozers here, I think, were fined and deported. And Paul Hayward had to start up somewhere else. Meanwhile, in Bangkok, the murders had started. This is a guy called Ian Travis. He was a New Zealander who was murdered after quitting Foreign Currency International and taking lots of stuff with him. He angered, obviously, Jim Muller. The gunmen were actually caught, and you can see that's from a newspaper. They're reconstructing the murder, as they do in Thailand. Warrants of arrest for conspiracy to murder were issued for Jim Muller and his wife, and also Jalit Sanitjon. That's the guy that confronted me and told me that he knew my name and address earlier. But Muller was actually extradited back to Thailand. The Atlanta court were happy to send him back, but when they got back to Thailand, the charges were dismissed. Then the kidnapping started. This is Paul Hayward. He was kidnapped by Thai police and taken to a police station annex, and after a few tears, he handed over $800,000. The next person was to be kidnapped was Mark Hutchison. He was kidnapped also by Thai police, and he'd paid $400,000, part of the half the figure demanded, when his wife managed to get a message out to police through the American embassy, and other police raided the flat where he was being held. The fact that Hutchison's wife was the sister of a former governor of Bangkok might have probably expedited that arrest. Then 2 Americans were also charged. They weren't caught on the scene. They were arrested somewhere else. These are the Mccleary Brothers, John and James Mccleary. They were billed in the Thai media as professional kidnappers, the mafia from the States. But when it came to the trial, they produced documents saying from the U.S. Embassy, they had no previous convictions. They admitted they'd worked for Hayward and Hutchison as their bagman, but said they'd never met the policeman in the dock beside them. Nevertheless, they got 18 years imprisonment, and the police got 12. And you'll notice from this photograph after the court case, all the people wearing blankets over their heads are Thai police, his co-defendants, and Hayward is obviously only one they're willing to expose for the cameras. Hayward then started to write, Mccleary started writing to me from jail through a monk. I should say, for investigators looking for criminals in Thailand, you can find them in the Thai police, the monkhood, the charities like the Optimist. It's good to look in the Rotary clubs. This actually is a convicted post office robber from Glasgow, Lockie McLachlan, who also had access to prisons. If you're a Buddhist monk, you can go and visit people and get a long period without other people interfering. Right, here, I'm just another example. This is the head of Patio Police Foreign Volunteers. Niels Koloff is a very well-known underworld figure in Denmark before he came to Thailand. He did time for pimping, coercion, and other offences. Right. I just go back there. Just going to skip this a bit. I might come back to it later, but right. This is Mccleary. So I've had a series of letters. He explains that when he had worked for Hayward, when he left, he'd had a row with Hayward over the death of Hayward's accountant. Hayward's accountant was an American called Cameron, who took an overdose in the Omni Tower, which is a building in the center of Bangkok, heroin overdose. Mccleary said he knew it wasn't, he didn't take heroin, and in fact this overdose was forced. It was a forced injection by two soldiers. I can't verify any of this story at all, but there have been many allegations generally of people in Thailand dying of overdoses which have been forced, and this is one. It is a known method of killing somebody. Having said that, so he took these documents, and the police, when they questioned him, demanded the documents, and they tortured him for those documents, he says. And this is the result of the torture. When he was eventually released from prison, he had 7 out of 10 toes amputated. Sorry, I'll be with you in a second. Okay. Anyway, the documents provided. Sorry, that's his. He was a bag man. So he was claiming that he claimed that every month he gave about $600,000 to $700,000 to Thai police. That was starting with the Immigration Department, going on to the Crime Suppression Department, the Metropolitan Police, and the Economic Crime Unit of the Thai Police. That's a bit like paying off the City Fraud Squad. The documents he brought out showed one of the scams done in the name of Jackson Cole, and how money was being transferred to the Hong Kong Shanghai banks in Hong Kong and the China Trust in Taiwan, and it showed how the commissions his guys were getting, what the terms were of Jackson Cole was providing. Mccleary is now out of jail. He's back in Florida, and he keeps himself armed for some odd reason. He thinks somebody's going to shut him up. Right, I continued working on this story and got together with a group of victims known as the Fraud Recovery Group, and we managed to put together quite a lot of stuff. Sorry, I also wrote about this at the time. That's just a story on the Mcclearys. So we knew all the scams and the companies Hayward was using. We knew the objects that he was selling, and we knew his banker couriers. These are the guys that go to Hong Kong or Taiwan and they open up a company and then they open up a bank account and then they wait for the money to come in and they take it out and either take it in dollars or they skip it to another bank. I know this guy, David Strudwick, he's got a two-stool bar in Chiang Mai in Thailand, but on paper he's worth millions with these, companies in different places. It's all obviously boiler room money. So a lot of people are picking up on this story. This is Benjamin Robinson in Hong Kong pointing out the Hong Kong banks are laundering. And even The Guardian picked up the fact that Jackson Cole was a scam, and he named a guy as Paul Hilton, but said it wasn't really named. So people are aware that this Paul Hayward or Hilton is up to no good, generally. And even the fraud squad knew at the time, too. Right. We'd also found Paul Hayward buying up shares in Crawley Town Football Club, here in Sussex. I wrote a story, then he sold it quite quickly. But it all smacked of money laundering, which of course it was. Most of all this stuff, of course, I was passing on to SOCA. SOCA existed then in Bangkok, Serious Organised Crime Agency. And we also got a list of all Hayward's companies in Thailand. Over 100 companies. And this list, it was like gold, and it was very professionally done because Hayward's name wasn't in any companies at all. But the list came with diagrams showing how he owned these companies through other companies and so on. And it's only later I learned that this list came from the United States Embassy. So I was wondering why they weren't doing more with it themselves. Perhaps they thought I would get away with more than them. I don't know. Hayward had set up this company called Eclipse, which was his cover, just running bars and so on. And I'd written quite a few stories about him by this stage, and eventually he came on the phone to me, and he said, "Hey, Andrew, we don't need to be enemies. Can I help you in any way? Fund you or something?" And I said, no, thanks. And he talked about his plans for, this is Nana Plaza again, it's all very boring stuff. And eventually I said, well, there is something you can do for me. I've got a friend who needs to get out of the country and not go through immigration. Can you help? And he said, well, yeah, sure, how? How do you want it? We can do a walkthrough at Suvarnabhumi International Airport at Bangkok, or we can take you in a car across the Malaysian border. So that seemed to me at least to confirm how he was getting a lot of stuff in and out of the country. And Mccleary had also talked about the money runs through the Malaysian border. So boiler room raids continue in Bangkok, but they all work the same way. Whistleblower goes to the police raid boiler room scammers deported, police talk to the bosses, whistleblower runs for his life, the scammers return. And even as you see in this photograph, in the last arrest, all these guys are now allowed to wear masks. This is very unusual in Thai police press conferences, especially where foreigners are concerned. So one of these places was one of Paul Hayward's boiler rooms in a house in northeast Bangkok. And the scammer, the whistleblower on this was a guy called Stephen Sharp. Having blown his whistle, he was now on the run, and he came to me, and he dropped a load of documents, and I put him in a hotel, and next I heard from him 3 days later, he called me up and said he was in trouble. He was in Manila and banged up in prison, where he'd been arrested for sex with a minor and drugs. This is unbelievable. I mean, one place not to run, as Ken will later tell you, to get away from boiler rooms is to go to Manila. So, myself, together with the Ford Recovery Group, kept this guy alive and in food in the Philippines. And I contacted the Philippines Human Rights Commission. They conducted an investigation and found that the minor was a 27-year-old prostitute who admitted being paid to make the statement. And the drugs were obviously fitted up. Their report. Well, basically, they call for the prosecution of 6 policemen. I don't suppose it ever happened for a second. Okay, and then we have another whistleblower, Philip Bean. He's calling me up from, says I'm stuck in a house in Bangkok. It's a boiler room. They've got my passport. Can you help me? I said, well, just make a run for it. You know, we'll get your passport back later. So I picked him up. I told him to meet me at, gate number 8 at the terminal, and I picked him up about 1 o'clock in the morning, put him up in my house, and I had to call the DEA because there were a lot of drugs in the house, and that's a much easier holding charge in Thailand. So DEA guy liaised with the Thai police. Unfortunately, he liaised with the wrong Thai police. I brought this guy into the police. They wanted to charge him. They did raid the house, and they arrested Frank Giannini. I knew about Frank Giannini. He'd been accused only a year earlier of running down and killing 2 Thais in an accident in Pattaya, and that case had totally disappeared. Right, okay. So what happened was that eventually, we had to, the DEA luckily forced the issue, and we got Philip Bean out of the police's clutches. And I took him to the airport and saw him out of the country. But as you can see here, on the way out, he was basically stripped of all his money, and which was described as a charge for searching him, and told never to come back to Thailand. Right. The police colonel, who was in charge of that investigation, was, as you can see here, he called me up about a week after this, and he got his assistant to call me up and said, we must have got off to a wrong start. I want to investigate boiler rooms. Can you come in and see us? And I decided not to. I'd only just had another threat from the boiler rooms, which said, this is your get-out-of-jail-free card. Hand over your website. We'll pay for it. But the alternative was, it looked like I was going to be fitted up for something. Anyway, I didn't take the chances. Colonel Limrat had been part of a special investigation into the Crime Suppression Division and National Investigation Bureau on the order of the Crown Prince. They were accused of all sorts of things, from human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, bribery, oil tax evasion, all sorts of stuff. And they were presumably, obviously guilty, but they were sentenced in a one-day trial. But it wasn't so much an anti-corruption probe. The prince had just got rid of his latest wife, and all her relatives were in that section of police. Today's situation exists that Paul Hayward's now running this group, which controls Nana Plaza and all that sort of stuff. And that's their website. Corporate social responsibility, I notice. He pays money to charity, quite a lot. And that's really about the state of boiler rooms in Thailand at the moment. There is now has been, in the last month, I've warned about boiler rooms in Cambodia. People will call me up and tell you where they're operating, what product they're selling. If we can find out what product they're selling and what company they're using, then we just put it up on the net. So if anybody's thinking of investing and using this company, they'll know it's a fraud. So we cause them some damage. I think we're going to do another one next week. But I'm not too cheerful about the prospect in dealing with boiler rooms. I've just reading Private Eye today, and they say, you know, the National Crime Agency has got a budget of only 4 million quid for all money laundering and foreign crime. That's for the whole world, you know. We know the fraud squad were involved in the investigation into Hayward way back as 2005, and now the guy in the Hong Kong end of that, the Chief Inspector Steve Berry, has retired and joined HSBC as Chief Security Mitigations Officer, you know. So they are, of course, one of the major receiving banks for Hayward scams. However, anyway, I think Ken Gamble has got some more positive news to tell you. I'm a bit down on boiler rooms, but Ken Gamble has had some success in the Philippines and recently, so I'm going to hand over to him just now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. So, yeah, I'm going to talk today about a different aspect of boiler rooms. I've been an investigator for 30 years, and for the past 10 years I've been investigating boiler room operations in the Philippines, and they are a massive, massive criminal empire in the Philippines, very well protected, very well funded, and they've become a power unto themselves over there in recent years. For the past 5 years, I've been making fairly frequent arrests of some of the players, and today I'm going to give you a brief presentation of what the situation is in the Philippines. If I can get my thing to work, how do we? Okay, that's. Okay, so Manila, everyone's heard of Manila, Philippines. It's the capital. About 20 million people live there. The bright side of the Philippines is what has been attracting all the young English-speaking professional males from all over the world to the Philippines. The sun, the surf, the women, the good life, they're coming over by the hundreds, including a lot from Britain, a lot from England, Canada, Israel, even Australia. Any English-speaking country are ripe for recruitment agencies to bring people over to the Philippines to work in these so-called telemarketing centres, reading scripts and basically doing sales work, and they end up getting lured into these boiler room operations. Some of them don't even realise that it's illegal. The Philippines has also got a dark side. There's a drug war going on in the Philippines. There's been over 20,000 executions, and many of these committed by the police themselves. Most of you have probably heard of the drug war in the Philippines. The president has taken a ruthless stance on drugs and basically wiping out the drug gangs, which includes people in government, includes police officers, mayors. I was there recently and I heard on the news 2 separate assassinations of mayors in 2 separate cities in 1 week, both by snipers. So, you know, this is on the news on a regular basis, and it's the police and the government are focused very much on traditional violent crime, and they've really got no focus and very little understanding about the massive business of financial crime, which has become an industrialised criminal enterprise in Manila. So the opportunities for criminal gangs is just massive there. One thing that very few people know about the Philippines is that it has extremely good bank secrecy. In the Philippines, anybody can open up a US dollar account and do whatever you like with that account, launder money, carry out criminal activity, drug trafficking. Whatever you do, you cannot touch, or the government cannot touch, a foreign currency account. It's prohibited under the Philippine law. There's a presidential decree, which I'll talk about more in a second. The bank secrecy in the Philippines is what prevents law enforcement agencies from touching bank accounts. The average police officer over there cannot look into a bank account. Police are completely forbidden to investigate bank accounts. They have a special unit of the Philippines government called the Anti-Money Laundering Council, AMLAC, and they're just a bunch of accountants. They're not actually law enforcement officers, but they're the only authority that's allowed to look into bank accounts in the Philippines, but only peso accounts. They're not allowed to look at these foreign bank accounts. So the bank secrecy has fuelled the massive industry of investment fraud. The second issue is police protection. The police are actually protecting the boiler rooms. They're getting paid anything from $1,000 a month up to $10,000 a month US to actually flag any complaints that come in. The NBI is notorious for being on the payroll of some of these gangs, and I know personally sources who have been involved in paying police, and it's a business, it's a racket, similar to what Andrew spoke about. In Thailand, it's become a massive business and money-making enterprise. I recently met a sergeant who's on about $400 a month, and he just bought a brand new Toyota Fortuner, like a Land Cruiser, and I think that was the second car in 3 months. So these guys are making serious money. The third issue is a corrupt judiciary system. It's quite well known there that you can pay the prosecutor and you can pay the judge in a case, and many times cases have fallen over because the judge has been paid off. So it's a little bit like Mexico and the drug cartel. You know, everybody has a price, and in the Philippines, that's very much a true statement. The fourth issue is cheap labour. So a lot of these operators of boiler rooms and investment fraud syndicates are actually capitalising on cheap labour. It's very inexpensive to hire people in a telemarketing call centre. Staff there are cheap, lawyers are cheap, accountants are cheap. Everything is cheap. So it's very easy to set up a big operation and make a lot of money in a very short time. And of course, the massive profits that they make, that they pour into expansion of their operations, they pay off their government contacts, they pay law enforcement, and they build their operations up. And I've seen small little groups come over there and start up a 10-man office, and then a year later they got 100 people working in their offices. They got 3 or 4 offices, and then they get up to hundreds and hundreds of people. And as you'll see in a second, a raid we did earlier this year involved 500 people, 480 Filipinos were arrested, and 8 Israelis. So this is the total trades of one day. This is the average day in an average boiler room. Now there's 65 to 100 gangs operating in Manila at the moment. They're from small operations to quite large. This is a medium-sized operation that they earn in one day, $100,000 in one day. Some days they make $300,000 or $400,000. So this will give you an idea of the type of money that they're making. This is US dollars. This is enough to fund their expenses and operations for a whole year in one day. And this is right from the office of a boiler room that was obtained by an internal source. The Foreign Currency Deposit Act of the Philippines, this is an extraordinary act. It's an extraordinary law because it prohibits the government from investigating or interfering with a criminal's money laundering operation. It literally prohibits the government from interfering. The government has no power. The police have no power. The courts have no power whatsoever to put their hands on a foreign currency account. So what a lot of the criminals are doing is they're laundering the money back into the Philippines, setting up corporations, US dollar accounts. They're laundering it from Hong Kong and Malaysia and all these other countries, all back into the Philippines, into corporate entities set up by the average Filipino on the street that's paid, 1,000 pesos to put their name on the company, and then they'll just draw the money out in cash, and then ultimately they just close the account. So there's no mechanism in the Philippines for law enforcement to come along, and even if a police officer or a task force is investigating a particular syndicate, they cannot touch the bank accounts. Now, is that dumb or what? But if you're the president or the government in the Philippines, you'll know, you would understand the reason why they have these laws. It's purely to protect themselves, because every senator, even the president, have all got foreign currency accounts, right? So that's one of the reasons why boiler rooms are absolutely, becoming a massive enterprise in the Philippines. This is a case that we did just recently on August 15. I'd been investigating a syndicate for the past 18 months, and we tracked them to Manila, to the outer suburbs of Manila. And I'll just play you the video while I'm talking here. Basically, a group of foreigners, Americans, Canadians, Filipinos and British, were running an operation that was compartmentalised into several houses and several offices. They were very well set up. They'd been paying off the police for 18 years for protection. Unfortunately for them, I didn't use the police that they were paying for the operation. I went to a special operations unit, part of the regional intelligence division of the police, whom I have a close relationship with, who are usually involved in investigating corrupt police. And I did the raid with these police that I knew and trusted. When we raided the house, the police also seized unlicensed firearms, arrested an American and 2 Canadians. One of the Canadians very well known to us, who had been in the business for probably close to 20 years and had laundered money for other syndicates for quite a long time. The American was from New York and had been in the Philippines for 18 to 20 years and operating, making an enormous amount of money, lived in a very nice home. That's the regional director there, who gave a press conference in the actual office, in the back office of the criminal that was arrested. This guy here, Richard Rakiopi, typical con man, very charming on camera, but turned very nasty once he was locked up in jail. Now, these guys have been charged with fraud and SEC violations, and they were granted bail, only to be immediately arrested by immigration authorities for being non-desirable aliens and for being undocumented because their passports were misplaced during the police operation. So it gives you an idea of how these people are no longer working in the big offices. They're getting into backyard operations, home offices. A lot of the guys are working from apartments. They're smart. You can't track them through, very difficult to track them through banking, as I just explained. Very difficult, if not impossible, to track them through IP addresses. So the traditional cybercrime methods of tracking these criminals is very, very difficult. So we have to revert back to traditional methods of investigation, that is tracking them through, on-the-ground human sources, surveillance operations, physical surveillance, coupled with cyber intelligence and using technology as well. We have the ability, or the certain units of the Philippines government have the ability to triangulate phones. So if we get a cell phone belonging to one of the suspects, we can triangulate it within 3 to 4 metres. And we've located a number of suspects by the triangulation of phones. There's only 1 or 2 units or government agencies in the Philippines that can triangulate phones. So that's one method that we have to resort to try and actually track the locations of these guys. But these guys usually are very seldom ever busted. Maybe 1 in, 10,000. I mean, it's just a ridiculous amount of low convictions, and very few of them, once they're locked up, are actually even convicted. Usually they try to pay their way out. They either pay off the judge, the prosecutor, the police to muddy the waters, muddy the evidence, or they will actually, if they think they're really in trouble, they're going to settle with the victim and say, I'll pay you the money back on one condition, that you must drop the case against me. So what we do as recovery experts and as working in the private intelligence and recovery business, we use law enforcement as leverage, as part of our arsenal of weapons to go in, arrest these people, take them down, and then we demand the money back, because that's our role, is to get the money back. So we don't arrest them for law enforcement purposes, we arrest them because they've taken our clients' money. So we use that process for recovery, and it works very well. This is the subject of a documentary. Anyone that's interested, Al Jazeera came along and they filmed this story, and they put a documentary out called Swindle Kings of Manila, which was aired around the world in September. It's an interesting story about how we tracked the gang and how we uncovered the evidence, and some of the hurdles along the way, including a hitman that was hired to have me killed, who the program interviewed. Not in this operation, but he was hired to get rid of me in another operation, and subsequently decided to switch sides, which renewed my faith in human nature. There's a lot more good people than bad in the world. So this next case is also a boiler room, but it's leaning towards cryptocurrency. They were doing a Bitcoin scam, a scam called Financial Trading Online. Now this is run by probably one of the biggest Israeli syndicates in the world. There's a group of these people. They're not all hand in hand, but they're all associated with each other. They're a massive network. They have an enormous amount of people, a lot of infrastructure. This gang has actually bought, I'll show you the raid while I'm talking. The video is supposed to play there, but I don't know if you can make it play. But that's a raid on the 6th of June. Now, this case, as I said, Israelis. There were only 8 Israelis arrested, but it was all being controlled from Cyprus, from Israelis in Cyprus, and they set up a call centre that grew from 100 people to 500 people. So the police arrested 480 odd people during the arrest operation. And it's a very interesting story about what happened to the Israelis, and it just goes to show the power of money in this country. I'll just go back. They were paraded on TV, which is a very common thing for. Don't worry about the video. That's fine. Don't worry about that. I'll just go to the next clickers. There we go. So what they do in the Philippines, the police love to parade their criminals. When they arrest someone, they parade you on national television. Firstly, they like to take credit, and it's also sending a message. If you're going to come and commit crime in this country, we're going to expose you. We're going to put your face out there. So it's very common for the police to parade them. And these guys were paraded around, and it was a massive news story. It made world news. It was on CNN. This is a very big story. These Israelis arrested this big crime gang. $1 million a day they were making. Every single day they were pulling in $1 million on their website, Financial Trading Online. It was a platform, and it was a forex trading platform, and they were marketing this heavily all over the world, mainly to English-speaking countries. Again, it's mainly targeting English-speaking, and they particularly targeted people in South Africa, in Canada, in England and Australia, but not the US. They're not dumb enough to target Americans, because if they do, we all know what the FBI do, and the American law enforcement will come after you if you commit crime against US citizens. So, interestingly, sorry, I pushed the wrong one. So this is a news story. No bail for 8 Israelis in online fraud. Look at the date, June the 9th, 2018. So they made a big hoo-ha about these guys being involved in syndicated fraud. In the Philippines, 5 or more suspects involved in an organised swindling operation, whether it's online or offline, is a very serious offence. It carries 40 years in prison. It used to be the death penalty. It's called syndicated estafa. It was the death penalty up until Marcos lost power, and they changed the law to life imprisonment. So you get caught in a syndicated fraud case and you're going to get 20 to 40 years in prison, no less than 20 years in prison if you get convicted. And yet these people are here parading around doing this completely fearless of the police. Why? And there's clearly 8 guys there and 480 odd Filipinos. Well, there only has to be 5 or more, and that's a syndicated crime that carries life imprisonment. So potentially all those people that were arrested, you didn't see the video, but they burst in there and they arrested all these people. All of those people potentially were facing life imprisonment for being involved in a syndicated fraud. But remarkably, only 5 days later, the headlines changed. All of a sudden, the crimes, these serious crimes against these Israelis, suddenly were reversed completely, and the media did a 360 on the story, and now the headlines were, this is an exclusive story, of course, Filipino authorities free Israelis arrested in call centre raid. 2 days later, or within 24 hours, they were escorted out of the country by a lawyer who used to be the Prime Minister's lawyer, Prime Minister of Israel. 3 lawyers went to the Philippines to represent these people, and they were very high-profile lawyers from Israel. They were paid a lot of money to come and represent these guys. And suddenly there was a deal struck, and these people were escorted out of the country, 7 of them. One of them, unfortunately, didn't have his passport. There was an issue with his passport, and he got caught, and he's still in jail. So, but 7 of them managed to flee the country, and they were escorted through the airport. And I spoke to immigration officers that said we had no power to stop these people because they were led through. The Commissioner's orders were to allow them to go through the airport. There was no way that the Immigration Department had any authority to stop these criminals from leaving the country. And yet 5 days earlier, they were very proud and boasting about how they'd locked up this gang. Now, somewhere along the lines, someone got paid off, right? And this is the problem over there. This operation was shut down. Everyone's still facing charges. They're still going to issue warrants of arrest against the 7 people, the Israelis. Goodness knows if they'll ever actually bring them back. But it just highlights the reason why boiler room operators are gone to this country to carry out this very, very serious large-scale fraud and massive, profitable business that's almost, it's almost impossible to get caught unless someone like me comes along and actually works really hard to infiltrate the group and to actually find the locations of these operations, because they all run under fake companies, they all run under fronts, and then they don't have a face to the public. They're very hidden, they're very underground. So what can be done? Yeah, good question. I talked about this in the US earlier this year, and I just spoke about this in the Cayman Islands at some other conferences where there was quite a lot of law enforcement people. I work very closely in my team, including Alan here and some of our other people scattered in various parts of the world, work very closely with law enforcement. In fact, we've had very major governments in the world, I won't mention which ones, come to us recently and want to work hand in hand with us. And for the first time ever, I've been at this for 30 years, they're actually knocking on our door saying, you know what, we'd like to work with you guys, we'd like to team up with you, what do you got? What can you give us? What can you tell us about this? So now they're reaching out and finally realising the importance of these government-private legal relationships. And we're forging relationships now with several governments. We've been to meet the president in one country over a money laundering case. it's unheard of for this government, this particular government, to use a firm of private individuals like us to look at a massive money laundering case. But this is where the world is changing, and law enforcement agencies are realising we have to reach out and start spreading our wings. We have no intelligence about the investment fraud business, which is a billion-dollar industry, but we have a lot of intelligence about terrorists and Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all this, but we have no intel about who's doing this internet fraud. And I can tell you now, it's only a matter of time before you'll see headlines where one of these syndicates that have made hundreds of millions of dollars are going to be directly connected to a terrorist organisation, and the money's going to go straight into the pockets of a terrorist organisation. It's happening now. They did uncover an operation in 2004 that was funding JI in Indonesia. So it's only a matter of time when internet fraud, this type of fraud, is actually going to be taken seriously because it's extremely profitable. It's high profit, low risk, and very few people ever get caught. So the partnerships which we're trying to forge at the moment are helping us because we have some air support now. We're like the lone soldier running down the field facing this massive enemy who are very dangerous because they have fake, corrupt police on their payroll. But now we go in, us small little firms that are doing asset recovery or whatever, and we've actually got some air support, including some very powerful foreign governments who are now riding behind us and actually very interested in what we're doing. And we're going to see a lot more arrests and these types of cases in the near future, not just in the Philippines. But we already have forged partnerships in Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, Hong Kong, China, the US. So we've been working very, very hard to build the relationships, and we do it at places like this, conferences like this, where you meet people. It's all about the contacts. If you're in the private sector and you want to really succeed, you've got to have connections and contacts. The more connections and contacts you have, the more you'll succeed. And that's it for me. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Our Israeli friends, if indeed you would call them friends, which I suspect you probably wouldn't, obviously Israeli passport holders have visa-free entry in normal circumstances into the entire EU, Schengen and non-Schengen, and into North America, and as I understand it, most likely Australia and New Zealand. Did the Filipino authorities notify these arrests to the embassies of the United States, Canada, Australia, and to the EU delegation and to the embassies of the major EU member states in Manila?
I don't know. They certainly notified the US embassy and the Israeli embassy. I don't know about the other embassies because there were only Israelis that were arrested, but a couple of them had US passports as well, joint, Israeli passport and US passports. So yeah, they did notify them, but what actually happened behind closed doors in that case, no one will know. All we know is they got out of the country.
Because Europol are starting to do a lot more work on fraud as in its own right, but also as a link with other issues. And I wonder if there's an opportunity there, because it isn't always treated that seriously in some EU member states. And certainly as was made very clear in a couple of episodes of the McMafia TV series, the Israeli link with the Russian-speaking countries is one really which perhaps hasn't been tapped yet. Thank you.
Absolutely. This Israeli group, one of the Israeli groups that we were looking at, they've got 80 call centres just in Georgia, next to Russia. 80 call centres doing doing internet fraud, basically, like binary options, all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's just, people don't realise how big the investment fraud industry is and how big it's becoming. and how organised crime is entangled completely in it right now. And some governments, some of our most powerful governments, have recently set up and taken very strong notice because of the amount of money that's been passing through bank accounts, the amount of US dollars that's being laundered around the world in these operations. And before, you could hardly get a policeman to take interest in it, you know. Any others? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.